Hello there, welcome to the RetroSaber podcast, where we always take the high ground. Before I play for you today's podcast, I just want to give a quick shout out to Raza is Retro for taking part in this fantastic video you're about to listen to and see. I'd also ask that for those that are interested, please stay tuned right till the very end, where you'll hear an awful lot about Raza's own channel and the very real and emotional reasons behind it. I'd also suggest adding his channel and checking that out, because at some point down the line in the next week or so, he's going to be showing a exclusive version of the interview we did with snippets and bits that were cut out of this version. So it's definitely worth checking out both. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, today's podcast is something a little bit special. Having done a lot of reviews and other videos, challenges linked to the Street Fighter games, and especially the Street Fighter 2 sub-series of games, I had decided to do a podcast focusing specifically on those games, going all the way from Street Fighter 2 all the way up to Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And as much as this is something that I would manage to get by okay on my own, this is also something where I thought it would be worth bringing on board someone else who maybe has some complementary knowledge on these games. So for the first time ever, I have someone joining me on my podcast, and I'm very happy to say that it is the well-known super savior of YouTube, Raza is Retro. Raza, hello.
Hey Saber, how's it going? I hope all is well.
All is very well, thank you. First of all, before we go anywhere, thank you very much for joining me for this podcast. Hopefully it's something we can both enjoy. And how are you today?
I'm doing very good. Thanks for asking. And most definitely, I think it is something that we both are going to enjoy. And at the same time, right back at you. Thank you for making this happen, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Not a problem at all. It's great to have you. Raza, just quickly, before obviously the main focus of this is going to be looking at the Street Fighter 2 games, but really quickly, I just thought if we both gave our understanding or knowledge experience with that original Street Fighter arcade game, I know it also came on the consoles. I know you'd recently done a little video about that on your channel. What's your understanding, perception of that first Street Fighter game?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a game that's very special simply due to the fact that it's the very first Street Fighter game. Regardless of how one feels about it, because it definitely has a lot of mixed reviews, mainly negative, if we're going to be honest. But you know, it's like a novelty. If we don't have Street Fighter 1, then we would never have Street Fighter 2, and so on and so forth. So for that very reason, it is a game that's special to me. The game itself, there's definitely some good points. Like it looks pretty good. It has some good graphics. The stages in the background look very beautiful as well. But the actual gameplay, which really that's the most important thing, unfortunately is not great. It's very clunky, and you only have the option of playing as Ryu. I believe if there is a second person playing, then you can play as Ken. So you're very limited, but I would recommend anybody to give it a try if they are a Street Fighter fan.
Yeah, I think my understanding is very similar. I think it's one of those games that if you go in as a fan of retro games, you will find reasons to enjoy the experience. It's a piece of history, isn't it? Like you said, without that, we don't have all these other legendary games. This entire legendary franchise, I mean, the characters Ken, Ryu, and Sagat especially, I think some of the characters we see later on in Alpha games and others come back to that game too, but especially those three, that's where they're all originally from, and it's a piece of history. It's a novelty, as you say. I suppose maybe at the time it was considered a lot better than it is now. Maybe it's a game that hasn't aged so well. I haven't actually got round to doing a retro review on that one yet. I'm sure I will do at some point, but I definitely did enjoy watching yours, and I would certainly recommend that to anyone to have a look at. It was a leaping point. It was a starting point, and it was a good 4 years later when we got Street Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 bringing that and almost perfecting that one-on-one fighting game. And I'm going to ask you right away the obvious question, the question that when you're talking about these games, everyone gets asked. Who's your favorite character?
So growing up, it was obviously Ryu and Ken.
Yeah.
But as I grew older, and for whatever reason, I just had a liking to Blanca. I think really what I just liked about him was he was different. He looked different in the sense that he wasn't a human character, or that he was a half human, based on his story, right? That he was a human, and then they did scientific experimentation on him, and
Yeah.
made him like that. The fact that he was very easy to use as well, I find, and he was a good character to use as well. He was fast and strong, and he was very tactical. And I just liked his look. He was a beast. He just looked different. His stance, he had a bit of a crouch.
Yeah.
The only one that's a little similar to that would be E Honda. So I just like the fact that he was different. I think that's the thing that stood out for me.
Yeah, I think a lot of the characters you get in these fighting games, they fit cliches, don't they? You've got the guy in a gi that looks like the Karate Kid or whatever. You've got someone who looks like Bruce Lee from Enter the Dragon. You'll always have someone who's a kickboxer, an actual boxer. They're very much fighting cliches, and you're absolutely right. Blanca wasn't a cliche. He was completely different. He was literally a monster. I remember we spoke a little while ago, and he was one of, I think, if I remember right, 3 characters in the game that had what I generally call the button mash move. So you had E Honda, who had the 100-hand slap. You had the kick from Chun Li, the lightning kick, and Blanca had a similar move where he did the electrocution thing, didn't he? Where you came near him, you were getting fried.
Yeah, most definitely, and you're absolutely spot on there. And like I said, he's easy to use, right? You just tap the punch button and he electrocutes you. So I think that also attracted me about him as well. I'm not gonna lie that you didn't have to do anything too complicated or remember anything too complicated. He was kind of the perfect character. Like if you're stuck in a corner, he can get you out of a bad position.
Yeah.
So yeah, E Honda was the same way with 100 slaps, and Chun-Li with her, I guess we'll call it 100 kicks. They all 3 had that similarity, most definitely.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind me asking, who was your favorite character in Street Fighter?
Well, I've got to be honest. I'll initially echo what you said. Ken and Ryu were initially my favorites, and interestingly enough, now are probably the characters I go back to a lot more. But when the game first came out, after I played it for a while, it was Guile that became my favorite character. I always feel quite bad when I look at Guile because he looks, whilst a lot of the characters are very much stereotypes of different cultures, Guile couldn't be more the stereotype, the American flat top, American flag tattoo, covered in the military grade stuff. But I just loved him. He had, because obviously Ken and Ryu had the fireballs. They had that projectile attack there. But Guile had that sonic boom, which was kind of different, if similar. He had the flash kick, and a lot of his grapples were wrestling moves like German suplex, backbreaker. And I love wrestling. So I thought Guile looked cool. I loved the ice blonde flat top hairstyle, the little comb he did. I was always I was always someone who always had a comb with me when I was a teenager. I always had to make sure my hair was perfect. And I think it's interesting because we both mentioned Ken and Ryu. I think they're that sort of entrance level character, aren't they? They're the one that when you come in, everyone knows how to use them. Start with them, and then you branch off into a character. And I suppose coming back at you with another question, which would you say is the character that you either found it the hardest to play as, you just couldn't make it work with them, or you found them the hardest to play against? They were just a nightmare to play against.
I think 95% of people would say the same thing, and that would be Dalsim. Dalsim was not an easy character to use by any means. He was quite slow, and at least for me, I just felt like he didn't really flow. However, if you are somebody that knew how to use him correctly and you mastered his playing style or technique, he's probably one of the best characters to use because he can come at you in so many different ways with his, yoga flame, his teleportation, just his limbs, the fact that he can stretch,
Yeah, he's got the distance, the
his
range.
kick, the range exactly.
Yeah,
He had this one move, I think, where when you jump and then you press the kick button to go down, he does like a kind of, it looks like kind of like a drill, type
yeah,
of thing.
yeah.
So if you know how to use Dalsim, like for me, you're a true Street Fighter player because he's probably the hardest or is the hardest to use. And if you're playing against him, and you're playing against him with somebody that actually knows how to use him, he could be very, very difficult.
And I have to, because I 100% agree. I found him. Don't get me wrong, I always found Zangief a little bit tricky to master as well, but I think you're absolutely right. Dalsim was the hardest one. And if you were playing against someone who couldn't play as any other character, but they'd mastered Dalsim, you've already lost. Because
Yeah.
he's just too complicated to work around. So if you've mastered Dalsim, you're going to win 98% of your fights. What do you think made Street Fighter 2, that original Street Fighter 2, we'll talk about its flaws more so as we go on into the other games as to why they existed. What do you think made Street Fighter 2 made it such a successful game?
I think just simply the gameplay. Like you said, Ryu and Ken are kind of the entrance characters, and funny enough, when the game starts, the first cruiser that you have is set to Ryu.
Yeah.
So the game is encouraging you to select him. So it was, if you're selecting Ryu and Ken, and even other characters, once you get a hang of it, it's actually pretty easy to play. It's a fun game to play amongst your friends or even yourself against a computer. But the gameplay, it was just smooth. It was I guess it was even like kind of unique at the time. It was
Yeah.
modern because back then, prior to that, fighting games they weren't that great. So Street Fighter really it really revolutionized fighting games, and that particular gameplay, it really set the standard, not just for future Street Fighter games, but for fighting games in general.
Yeah.
So I would definitely have to say the gameplay, and there's so many other things that we can mention. The fact that you have, people representing, or characters representing, different countries, beautiful stages, great music, but it really comes down to the gameplay.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, I think I hadn't even clicked until you said it, what you mentioned there about it starting, it literally saying, look, here's Ryu, start with him. That's a really good point. I hadn't even factored that in. I think it does the basics well. It does the simple thing. The controls are simple and easy to play. And then if you want to do the special moves, they're a bit more complicated, but they still work. And everything is just, all the basics are done really well. So I suppose another factor which was really good on it is the level design. You mentioned there how nice the levels look. I mean, they're only effectively one screen. You're just seeing one screen with a little bit of sort of animation in the background. Which level for you was one that you really enjoyed, and especially one that you think captured the location it was at the best?
For World Warrior, I mean, I just have to say it out there that all the levels are beautiful, and they all did justice to their characters, and even, I guess, portraying each nation that each character was representing. Um, Not in terms of really portraying, but in terms of just that it just looks so beautiful. I do have to go with Ryu's stage. Just the way it looks. I believe you're fighting on top of which is like a castle.
Yeah.
The music itself, like you said, you have that little bit of movement with the clouds. It just flows and looks so beautiful, and I think it's a perfect representation of Ryu. In terms of cultural representation, or I guess stereotypes, if you will. Definitely Guile. It gives you that all-American feel for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's portrayed quite well. Dalsum too. It's portrayed quite well with the culture of India. Chun-Li as well. Um, late 80s, early 90s China. If they made a stage of China or Chun-Li now, it definitely look a lot different.
Yes.
So I mean all of them, but for me in terms of favorite, I would say Ryu. In terms of cultural representation, where I'm looking at it and I'm like, wow, I feel like I'm there. That would definitely be Guile and Dalsim.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, I would 100% say Guile. I I I know it's very much, it's an Air Force base, and that Air Force base could
Yeah,
be in any country in the world. So it may not be the best representation of just America, but for that character, this
yeah,
is an army guy, this is a military guy, and he's there
yeah.
on an Air Force base. You see the beautiful jet in the background. You see the other soldiers gathered around as if they're watching their friend, their compatriot fighting, and that just feels really good. The music on that level is really good as well. But one thing I really like about a lot of the levels is the interactive aspect. So a few of the levels, there's barrels, there's boxes that when you fall into them, they shatter. And it doesn't make any impact on the actual fight, but it makes it feel this isn't just a painting in the background. This is a real world that we're in. And I think it's in Spain, and he has that fence in the background that he can leap up and climb on and jump off. I just think when you have those interactive backgrounds, which I don't think we'd really seen in many games like this before, it really makes it feel like you're in that world. And I think I think it was just something the game did really well. Again, it's the basics, but it did it so well. There's a few people we haven't mentioned yet. I mean, we've spoken about most of the characters. There might be some that have slipped through under the radar, but I think we've spoken about most of them. But there's 4 particular characters we haven't mentioned. They are M. Bison, Vega, Balrog, and Sagat. And they are the 4 bosses in the first game. And for a lot of people, the issue was you couldn't play as them. And that was an issue for some people. I understand that. Now any character we fight, we can unlock or we can buy as DLC. That didn't happen back then. Back then, you had to wait until 1992, only 1 year later, when Street Fighter II Championship Edition came out. Now, Championship Edition was slightly sped up, but I'm not going to really focus on the speed because we'll talk about that more in Street Fighter II Turbo. It was slightly sped up, but the main novelty of Street Fighter II Championship Edition was these 4 boss characters being playable. How big of a deal, how big of a selling point, and how important to you was it that these 4 bosses that we'd only competed against were now playable characters?
I think it was quite big, and that's not just for me. I think that's for 98% of people that own Street Fighter 2 because, again, it's the same game, right?
Yeah.
But now the difference is that you have 4 additional characters, which we've seen before, but we weren't able to play as them. I do believe also in Champion Edition, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that you're able to fight against yourself, right? You could do like
Yes.
what's known as a mirror
Yes.
match. But the importance of having those 4 additional characters, which we've seen before, was big because again, it's like an updated version of a game that you already loved, and on top of that, it's not like 4 random or clunky or you know what I mean? Like it's the 4 bosses that you fight against, and now you actually get to pick them and try to master them, and each of them were good in their own way and had their strengths.
Yeah.
So I would say most definitely it was a huge selling point, and I think Capcom was very smart by doing that particular edition.
Yeah, it's probably worth throwing out there. I'm assuming most people know this, but it's probably worth throwing out there that the Street Fighter games, not just Street Fighter 2, but these were all games that had been in the arcade. So each version of this we saw was an updated arcade release. And they would only have released them on the consoles if they saw enough interest. If people weren't interested in playing as the bosses and just carried on playing Street Fighter 2, they wouldn't have bothered releasing it on the Mega Drive when they did, or the Genesis, as it's also called. So it obviously garnered enough interest. And I suppose part of that, as you say, it's these 4 characters. That's the main selling point. Because these bosses have been the ones who have been genuinely kicking your ass. Every time you've been playing the game, there's this feel that I'm not losing because I'm not good enough. I'm losing because these characters are so strong. They're untouchable. They're invincible. And now you can play as them. There's this sort of mindset. And for people that want to perfect, there's 4 more characters for me to perfect. These are the even better ones. You've got Vega, who can climb on fences. Never been able to do that before. You've got each of these characters. Sagat, who was in it all the way back in Street Fighter 1. Finally, I can play as him. And he was, for a lot of people, he was a favorite character. So we've got these 4 characters we can play as now. I think for me personally, some of them I found I was going, this is one of my favorite characters. A lot of them I found myself thinking, I actually don't really like playing as this character very much. Out of these 4 characters, you've got these 4 bosses now. Who is the one that you've got that drive and motivation to play as now you can?
I would definitely go with and he this is actually my second favorite character, is M. Bison.
Okay.
Simply just due to the fact that obviously number one, he's the final boss, right? He's the top G, as Andrew Tate would say. So he's a final guy. He's a big boss. And I mean, when you look at him, when you played him in World or played against him, excuse me, in World Warrior, you can just see his presence. It was so intimidating, and just the way he stands and the way he actually fought his Psycho Crusher, his ability to he does this particular kick where he kind of like leaps up and jumps on your head type of thing. He was just like a menace, and one thing that was really cool about his look was because in other games, sometimes you had like these bad guy bosses that looked like monsters or whatnot. I mean, he's human at the end of the day.
Yeah.
He just has that um psycho crusher ability, and I guess technology, if you will. And his Psycho Crusher uh, is probably one of my favorite moves that I've seen in a video game. It's one of the most beautiful things, just seeing Bison go across the screen. So definitely, M. Bison, and he was a perfect villain. I mean, he just looked like a dictator, to be honest with you. I really liked how they presented Bison, and I'll definitely go with Bison for that one.
Yeah, I totally agree. He's actually one of the last characters I would play as, interestingly enough. But I
Mhm.
totally agree with what you're saying about how he looks. He has got that evil, pompous, arrogant dictator look about him. But normally when you see those characters, they're like that as a persona, but in reality they're quite weak. He's the opposite. He looks as powerful as his persona is. And when you play, I remember playing the original Street Fighter 2 many times, getting to him and thinking, this is where it's all going to fall apart, isn't it? I'm just gonna lose here because he was so good. For me personally, it's Sagat, and I think there's something about that history. This is the character that was the first boss right the way back in Street Fighter One. But yeah, he's got this unique fighting style that it's similar to Ken and Ryu. He's got his own version of like he's got the tiger uppercut instead of the Shoryuken. He's got his own fireball type shot. He's got similar moves, but they're different enough. So I really liked Sagat. Obviously, you've also got Vega and Balrog. It's probably worth mentioning there is that sort of change around of names as well, isn't there? Sagat's
Yes,
name
yeah,
obviously was the same all along, but Bison, Vega, and Balrog from the original Japanese release, their names all changed around in line. I think it
yeah.
was, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think it was linked to Bison originally being the boxer, and because he looked so much like Mike Tyson, when it moved over
Yeah,
to America, it was going to be like a
exactly.
copyright thing or something. Am I right on that?
Exactly. That's what it was. Is that because of the name, because of M Bison, very similar to M Tyson. They I guess they got scared, if you will,
Yeah.
of copyright issues and whatnot. So when they released it in North America, then they changed the names around. And just a quick point on that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Which name do you feel is better? So like, which name suited them better, essentially, the
I
Japanese version or the North American?
I think the North American version. That could just be tainted by the fact that that's what I'm used to. Yeah, I'll be honest. But if I look at M. Bison as this great dictator, the name just fits. It's almost like I'm too superior for you to even know my first name. It's M. To M. Bison. There is something of an arrogance. It's almost like a title. Balrog to me, it makes me think of the Lord of the Rings, the Balrog, and it's like a monster or something. I like what you said. I like the idea that he's not a monster. I'm a man, but almost I see myself as beyond a man. I'm a god, but you're looking at me as a human. I think those names work. I actually think the name Vega actually suits the Spanish fighter
Yeah.
better.
Yes.
It just sounds good. I am Vega, and it's like it fits. It flows really well. I don't know if
And it
Vega
sounds
is
like
a
a
Spanish
Spanish
name,
name
but
too.
yeah, it does. I don't know if it
Yeah.
is one. I speak a little bit of Spanish, but not enough that I know names. But it
Yeah.
sounds right. You know, I'm sure some people might say that is culturally completely wrong, but for me it fits, and it fits well. And the other things to mention, as you said, there were other changes, little things to the colours, the minor tweaks to the graphics, but not much. And that's a theme we're going to touch on quite a bit as we move along here, because we had Street Fighter 2, we had Street Fighter 2 Championship in 1992, and then later, still in 1992, we hit Street Fighter 2 Turbo Edition. It's probably worth mentioning that the Sega Mega Drive got Street Fighter II Championship Edition. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System, SNES, Famicom, whatever you call it, got Street Fighter II Turbo. This is the third game that's Street Fighter II something. And as you sort of alluded to on the previous one, it's still the same game, isn't it? Street Fighter II Turbo. Yes, we got some changes to the coloration. We got some slight changes to the characters' movesets. I think Chun-Li finally gets a fireball thrown in. There's a few tweaks here and there to characters. But we've got no new characters. It's still the bosses. The only real change, the major change, is the speed. It's faster. Now, I'm going to quickly put across my point, and then I'm going to ask you to give me your perspective on this. Street Fighter 2, apparently people thought was too slow. I never understood why. I never felt that its speed was an issue, but apparently it was, maybe more so in the arcades. So we got a slight increase in speed in Championship. Then we get Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and they increase the capacity for speed greatly, and with a cheat code you put in, even faster. How big of a deal for you was it when Street Fighter 2 went faster?
I mean, I'm in the same boat as you. I mean, it's the speed for me was never an issue. I thought in World Warrior it was fine. I thought in Championship, okay, they increased it a little bit. That's fine too. But it never needed like a boost, I guess, if you want to put it that way, or to be much faster. I know maybe for arcade style, like that's more appealing. But for home consoles, and even this is my own opinion, but even for an arcade, like to put it simple terms, I guess, like it for me, it wasn't necessary. I mean, if you were gonna add a third edition or a third installment, changing the speed, it wasn't just gonna cut it. Change it up a bit, maybe add some more characters, or maybe change the characters' stages, or add more, move sets, or something. But just by simply adding more speed, it was a cash grab at the end of the day. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we had, so I think the alternate costumes for some of the characters changed between Championship and Turbo, but all they were was a palette change. They didn't give them new costumes, new looks. It was a change in the color. We're going to swap the blue for the green. We're going to swap the red for the yellow. There was no actual change to the character design other than we've swapped the color codes around. And I think of all the games, at least so far, that we've talked about, I think this was the least necessary. I think obviously they put Championship Edition on the Sega. They released Turbo on the SNES, but realistically, there was no reason why we couldn't have had the same game released on both. Maybe it was because it was an arcade thing and they thought the best way to make money is we're going to make Turbo as well. Let's release that one on the SNES. Sega may have been agreeing to it because they get a time where theirs is the only one with an updated version. Nintendo maybe agreed with it because that meant they get the best version. But as simply just looking as someone with a limited amount of money, I'm going, I don't need all of these games, all these versions of the same game. It's ironic as well because I actually think Street Fighter 2 Turbo was one of the best versions of the game. But I agree, it just wasn't necessary. I think briefly to go out on a tangent, I think we'd had a little bit of a discussion previously about this time. So you're talking 1992. I believe it's not far off this time when we've got the Sonic the Hedgehog games being released and all the marketing and advertisement for it is how much faster Sonic is than boring old slow Mario. Maybe there was a bit of a rush for speed. Things had to be faster to be cooler. Do you think that's a factor in this at all?
To be very honest, it's not something that I thought of, but now that you mention it, it makes sense. It's a very valid point that you bring up. It's a very good point because um, it, it makes sense. Like I said, I mean, it's not something that I ever thought of personally, but especially because when Sega came out, right, it was more seen as edgy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
More fast, more different. It was That's really what it was. It was a lot different from Nintendo.
yeah.
I've never understood why they had a three-button controller, but anyways, that being said,
Yeah, it just makes no
that being
sense to
said,
me. I'm like, why would you do that?
no, because there's somebody that's gonna listen to this by the name of 16 Bits and Bobs, and I always do that little dig about the three-button controller. So that's just a little shot, friendly fire at
Yeah.
him. But yeah, I mean, honestly, that's probably what makes sense. Aside from the fact that we also mentioned that arcade vibe is very fast and colorful and noisy. So
Yeah.
I think if we take both points together, it makes sense for sure.
So I suppose then we move on to, I think, the first time we are really getting a new. This is almost a game that to me could have potentially, with a few more changes, could have been Street Fighter 3. Super Street Fighter 2. And for this one, I am going to do a lot more of specifically interviewing you because for those that don't know, I never actually played it when it originally came out. I did get to sample it briefly in the arcades, but as a SNES owner, I'd bought Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I didn't have a lot of money. I could get games twice a year, birthday and Christmas, and I just couldn't justify buying the same game for the third time in a row. So I never got Super Street Fighter 2 until years later, various other versions, and I play it a lot now on the Nintendo Switch. But I'd never played it at the time. Now, I read a lot of magazines, I looked at it a lot. I think I could see that it visually, this was the first time we got new art. We got new character looks, especially on the menu screens and stuff. So, Raza, when you look at the art style in this and we see how the characters look, how do you think they compare to the previous games?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously when Super came out, and that's the version that I actually owned and I grew up with, but it just looked, if we're talking about just the art, because there's so many things we can mention, but if we just talking about the art, it was just superb. I mean, it just looked beautiful. Um, if I could simply put it, the other versions, and I'm talking about the look itself, look like maybe they were in high school, where this one looks like it's somebody that graduated from
Yeah,
university. I mean, it
yeah,
was just spot on. Um, without trying to say too much here, first change that we notice is the characters look different from the select screen,
yeah,
and they look more, I guess, polished, if we want to use that word. They look more polished. They look better. Um, they look really animated, I guess, if you want to put it that way. Like, and everyone just looks like a menace. Everyone looks cool because if you look at Champions in World Warrior, no disrespect, but some of the characters look a little funny. They don't look very, I guess, cool or edgy or even scary. Blanca, actually, even though it's a character I liked in the previous editions, I found his look to be funny,
yeah. Kind of
personally.
goofy looking,
And,
isn't he?
and and same with Kyle and even Ken. I found that he looked like Owen Wilson. But then when you come to Super, without naming all of them, everybody just looked on point. At the same time, the stages as well looked beautiful as well. You can see that there was a bit of differences. They just looked um, more out there, I guess, or more bright. At the same time, even the world map during the select screen is, it's rounded, it's bigger, it looks more beautiful. Even the sound the plane makes, when you're going from one place to another, it sounds more crisp. The background voice, when the guy says the country, in the first two, three versions, it sounds like, not as good. Where in this case, if he says something like Japan or like he says it like Japan, like that.
Yeah.
I'm probably not doing it that well, but like it's so animated, I guess. That's how I'll put it.
Yeah, it's probably worth saying as well, because they're not just, whereas in the previous few games, they mildly tweak and improve how they look. These are completely, at least on the menu screens and stuff,
Yeah.
these are completely redesigned. These are brand new art, isn't it? This is not an improved version. This is new. All of the way
Yeah.
the characters look are brand new designs, at least on the menu screen. I know the characters themselves, when they're fighting, look pretty much the same,
Yeah.
slight tweaks and changes, but on that menu screen, it is brand new art for all of them, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
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 We finally get a bit of a change between Ken and Ryu here. I think Ryu gets an improved fireball. Ken gets an improved Shoryuken, the dragon punch. And there's a few other tweaks. A few other characters get different changes to their moves. But the big change here is, for the first time, we get 4 brand new, completely new characters. So we have Cammy, we have T-Hawk, we have DJ, and we have Fei Long. But as a package set, what do you think they brought to the table?
I think they brought a lot, simply due to the fact that they were very different from each other, and also from the Street Fighter game. In one sense, they don't feel like they belong, but I'm saying this in a good way, if this is going to make sense.
Yeah.
But because they were so, I guess, out there, so different, they fit perfectly. Because again, all the characters, with the exception of Ryu and Ken, look, feel, and play different. And with Cammy, DJ, T-Hawk, and Fei Long, you really had a difference of characters. And at the same time, they were coming from different backgrounds as well. So you had a great representation of other nations, which I think was a big selling point as well, because fans love to see, their countrymen or countrywomen being represented. So I really think that the way they fit in, they actually fit in quite perfectly, despite being very different from everybody.
You've got your 4 new characters. Does this change your overall favorite?
It doesn't change my overall favorite, but what I can simply say is, between the 4, the one that I liked the most and the one that I used the most was Fei Long, simply due to the fact that he was very fast. And once you've mastered him, he's actually very effective. He also had an amazing stage with amazing music. On a side point, one of my favorite stages in terms of the music and the way it looks is Cammy's. It's probably one of the most beautiful stages out there for sure. So I would definitely say that Fei Long would be the one that I use the most and that I like the most. But in terms of overall favorite, it doesn't change anything there. I wanted to ask you as well, actually, since you asked me, who was your favorite from the 4 characters?
This is probably an interesting one. I mean, I love Cammy. I absolutely love Cammy as a character. Has nothing to do with the fact that she's absolutely gorgeous. I won't touch on that at all. That's completely irrelevant, But I genuinely love her as a character. It helps that she's English. I'm English.
Yeah.
That's nice, and that we'll talk a little bit about more of that in a second. But I'm rubbish as her. I can't play as her. I'm terrible, but I love playing as her. Normally, we tend to go for the characters we're good with. With Cammy, I just like the character. I think she's really cool, but I'm no good with her. I actually find DJ probably easier to play as. I think he's really cool. I love the Jamaican vibe to him. I have a bit of a thing for Jamaica in general, due to my love of the film Cool Runnings. But so I really like him as well. But I would have to say Cammy in general. I also like how she ties into Guile and some of the other stories and the backgrounds as well.
And on a side note, I just forgot to mention that another cool thing about Super Street Fighter 2 was the change of color palettes. Depending on the kick or punch button that you selected, you would get a different color variation, which I thought was really cool.
I think this is the first time that they've had more than 2 color palettes. I think in all the others, there was either 1 or there was 2, and they did vary. But this was the first time where I think there's either 6 or 8 different color palettes that you can use. So there's a wide range of them. Something you sort of mentioned there, and I think is really worth thinking about a little bit here. one of the things with Street Fighter 2, all of them, but we'll talk about it here because this is it at its peak, really, is the amount of diversity in the actual range of characters. And I know diversity is often a bit of a touchy subject these days, because you've got some people arguing there should be more of it, some people arguing that it's very forced into games, and I think it can be at times. But I don't think in these games it was. These weren't forced in, so we have people of different backgrounds. This was a game where people were representing different countries in a tournament, so it made total sense. And I think whilst at times some of those characters could be a little bit of a cliche or a caricature, I don't think that was done with any sort of negative connotation. I think this was a game which had diversity and cultural representation, seeing different countries done in one of the best ways we'd ever seen. What do you think on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, first we also have to look at the time that it was made too, right? These games were made in the
Yeah.
late 80s, early 90s. So it was obviously a different time and different period. And at the same time, they're not just representing different countries, they're also representing different fighting styles, which a lot of those fighting styles also come from those particular nations. So for me, I've never seen it in a negative light. I always thought it was cool.
Yeah.
I thought it was great. I mean, again, if you're selecting somebody from, a character that's from China, just as an example, like Chun-Li, there's going to be a certain way that she's going to look, and there's going to be a certain way that her stage is going to look, because you want to get that representation. And anybody that played Street Fighter, at least from my time or my days, they loved it. I had friends of various backgrounds who would complain sometimes, myself as well, like, hey, we don't have a Canadian fighter, or, we don't have an Italian fighter or a
Yeah.
Greek fighter or whatever. So the fact that they had that touch to it was just so cool, and it was done beautifully. And I think each character was represented quite correctly. And I also think that they were not represented in a negative light. Even if a character was bad, they were not showing that, hey, this character is bad because he's from this place.
Yeah.
He's bad because, he teamed up with Bison and so
Yeah.
on and so forth.
Absolutely. And each of the characters look different. We've got different races. We've got different,
Yeah.
not just different countries, but different cultures within the country.
Yeah.
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 Ken is very different to Guile. They're both American,
Mhm.
but they've both got a different feel. Interestingly enough, I didn't realize this until recently. Ken is actually half Japanese.
Yeah.
I was like, what? It was only when I was researching for a video I've done, and I was like, he's half Japanese, and he's actually not blonde. He dyed
Yeah.
his hair blonde in protest against his family. And it's all this lore. This is probably worth briefly touching on the lore and the story behind each character. You've got by this point, we've got what? Let's see, 8, 12, 16 characters. And the backgrounds, the stories as to why each one is in the competition, as to what happens to each one after the competition, how each one of these has a connection to someone else in there.
Yeah.
There's this proper little network of lore in the background, which just makes it different. This isn't just a game. There's more to it than that. And we'll touch on that at the very end, more so, that lore and where it took us. But we have to end on a slightly nagging point for me, which is Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, because apparently Super Street Fighter 2 went back to being a bit slower. And we've established that when the games are slightly slower, all of reality crumbles down around us and everyone's going to die and it's the end of the universe. So we have to make another Street Fighter 2 game in 1994. Bear in mind, Street Fighter 2 only came out in 1991. It's 3 years later, and we are on our 5th version of the same game. And Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, it had a slightly cooler intro. We introduce Akuma as a hidden background character, okay? But on the whole, Super Street Fighter 2 is one of the best versions, if not maybe the best version of the game. Did we need a turbo?
No. If we're gonna be very honest,
That's probably the best
we
and
get it.
simplest answer to any question ever. Did we need to? No. That was better.
No, I mean, if we're going to be very honest now, and that's something I forgot to mention. The Super Street Fighter 2, not Turbo, the actual Super Street Fighter 2, the new
Yeah,
challengers. That intro is probably the one of the best in video gaming history.
yeah,
Where you have Ryu getting pumped up, and then he throws his Hadouken, and then the Super just comes across the screen, and you
yeah,
hear that little lightning, type of
yeah,
sound, and it's
yeah,
beautiful. So now we have Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which I actually like the intro. I think it's cool. I think it's different. I like the fact that you have flashes of Cammy and Chun-Li, and then you have flashes of Akuma, and then same thing. He does the Hadouken, and now it's the Turbo version. The game itself, it's pretty much it is the same game the way I see it. I mean, yeah, okay, you can increase the speed. Yes, there is Akuma as an additional character if you punch in a specific code during the character select. You can also fight Akuma at the end. I think if you beat every single character without dying, so rather than fighting Bison, then Akuma pops up. But aside from that, it was not necessary.
no,
I will say that on the arcades, it was a big success. A lot of people liked it
yes,
on the
it was.
arcades.
It was.
For the arcades, okay, I don't mind it, but to have it, but even for the arcades, I think at Super, the new Challenger, I think that's where they should have left it. That's just my opinion, but it was not necessary.
No. And I don't really feel there's much else to say on that game. It was just, yeah, it's there. There's a few tweaks, a few changes, but and I don't think that's necessarily a problem in itself. But I think the problem is between Super Street Fighter 2 and each subsequent game. Basically, we're saying the same thing. There was a few tweaks, a few changes, a few tweaks, a few changes. Here's the characters now. Some more tweaks, some more changes. I think realistically, the big problem is that we didn't need five. We probably could have. He had three of them. If it went
Yeah,
from Street Fighter 2 to Street Fighter 2 Turbo, from Street Fighter 2 Turbo to Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, that would have been the three coolest versions of the same game ever. It has to be said, Street Fighter 2 especially had a massive impact right across pop culture, across just a wider impact on society in general. And it's cropped up and been seen in so many different places. I mean, one of the first things that comes to mind for me was having Street Fighter 2 comics as a kid that I remember getting. I think they were manga comics. I don't know if you ever saw them.
so I've heard of the Street Fighter comics, but I've never actually owned them. In general, I've never really owned comics myself.
It was a series of 8 comics, and it was very much using like the manga style. It might have been even adapted from an actual movie type thing that they did, or an anime type thing they did. But it was basically working through the tournament. It showed the characters, it had flashbacks, showed their interactions, and in each comic there was at least one-on-one fight. And in the center pages of the comics was like a fight poster, so it'd be Ryu versus Balrog, and it had the stats up there and stuff. And by the end of each comic, you know who'd fought, who'd moved on. And then I think there was two extra comics at the end, which were the comic book version of. I'm going to mention this, and then this is going to take us off on a whole other level. The Street Fighter live action movie. This movie is something. It's something special. I'm assuming. Have you seen this movie?
Unfortunately, I have. Yeah, I have seen it, and if I can put it in simple terms, you take the Street Fighter games, and you find out that there's going to be a live action movie, an iconic game with an iconic story that everybody, loves and adores. It's going to come to the big screen finally. We're going to get it live action. And then what did they do? They do a complete 60 degrees, and they say, you know what? Let's take a great game and let's just change it all around just to make a bunch of people mad. I've always felt that the guy that made the game, he probably just hated Street Fighter, or he was never able to beat the actual game. I mean, it didn't make any sense. I want to get your views on it as well, but to cut it short, it's nothing like the Street Fighter game in any sense.
No.
Whether you're going with the story, whether you're going with the way they look, we could talk about that briefly as well. But like, it just it didn't follow Street Fighter. It didn't do justice to the game. Simply put.
No, it was like I think by the end of it they had one aim. By the end scene, let's somehow make all these characters look like they're Street Fighter characters and stand and do a pose together. So this guy's wearing a red jacket. Let's have the sleeves rip off and then we can say he's Ken. This guy is a professor. He's just a doctor, a scientist. We're going to somehow put a chain around his neck, have his shirt ripped off, make him bald, and we're going to say he's Dalsim. These characters were awful. Like, what I will say, this film does come under the category of so bad that if you just sit there with the aim of having a laugh, it is hilarious. It is fun in that sense. But it couldn't be less like Street Fighter if you tried.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And again, I watched it quite recently, about maybe a couple months ago, and I watched it with a different lens. So what I mean by that is that in my head, I put that Street Fighter never existed. There's no game, there's nothing. This is just a brand new movie, a fresh idea, and so on and so forth. So when I watched it like that, although it's still a little lame and corny, it was enjoyable for me. But if I look at it in the lens that this is a Street Fighter movie that's based on the game, then I can never enjoy it because it just committed too many sins, if you will. And again, for me, the thing that never made sense was that they had Van Damme play as Guile, and Van Damme, great actor,
Yeah.
legend. But I mean, he's from Belgium. He has a Belgian accent. Guile is supposed to be like the most American guy out there.
Yeah.
Ryu and Ken don't even look like each other. Ken has long hair. The guy that they had, I think he had like medium short.
Yeah.
Ryu, they just, with all due respect, they just threw in an Asian guy.
Yeah.
It didn't make any sense. It didn't look like him. Sagat is 7 foot. They had a guy that was 5'11". Vega, he's tall, slim, and very pale. The guy that they had was of dark skin. Like he was tan, dark hair. It just, we can go on and on about it.
Yeah.
I won't. But the only character I will say that actually looked like himself was Zangief. I felt like
Yes.
Zangief actually looked like Zangief, but the rest, no.
And they made Zangief a moron as well. Like,
Yes.
he's an idiot. Like he literally says at one point, "Wait, are we the bad guys?" I'm like, "Oh my god, what a moron!" And Ken and Ryu are con artists, the two most honorable, dedicated fighters, and you make them con artists like scumbags. Cammy
and DJ. Sorry, I just wanted to mention. And DJ, they made him. What's his name? They made him Bison's right hand man.
Yeah.
And when things were not going well, there's a scene where he's like grabbing some, I think, gold or some stuff from Bison, like he's trying to steal, and he's like, "Oh, I should have never quit my job at Microsoft."
Yeah.
Like,
it's awful. It's awful. Cammy is English, and she's being played by an Australian. This is literally the opposite side of the planet. Unless you get a Martian, you couldn't find someone who's further away from England. It's so bad. Like, I love Kylie, and she doesn't actually look bad for the part. But
not at all.
Come on, you could find an English person, right? There's a few of us. There's a few of us.
Yeah.
You can. I'm sure if I walked out into the streets, I can find a blonde English woman somewhere.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, hey, if they put Van Damme as a Guile, then I'm sure they could have just went to England and grabbed anybody.
I suppose I should have been glad they didn't just find a Belgian woman for it, to be honest. I think the one character in it and I don't think he suited the part. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But if there is one person I'm going to sing the praises of, it is Raul Julia as M. Bison. He is nothing like M. Bison. He doesn't look like M. Bison. He's not built like M. Bison. He doesn't fight like M. Bison. But he just did such a good job as this campy, over-the-top dictator that I just loved him in it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, he did his role really well, even though he was not fit for the role.
No.
But because of the way the movie was because of the way it was catered, I guess, if you want to put it that way. He was perfect. He was a perfect Bison for that particular
Yeah.
type of movie. One thing to note is that that was his last movie that he did,
Yeah.
and he also did it while having stomach cancer. And the reason why he did that movie was he wanted to do something special for his kids because I think they like Street Fighter. So as much praise and respect we give to Raul Julia for playing that role, it's never enough because
No.
he did it through pain.
And he made that film. I mean, I actually,
Yeah,
although it was awful, I didn't
yeah.
mind Van Damme as Guile. But I know we're going to disagree on that one. But
That bothered me the most.
I know, I know. But Raul Julia as M. Bison, he made the
Yeah,
film fun. He was,
yeah,
and he has my favorite scene, quote,
yeah,
interaction in any film ever, where there's this
yeah,
big heartfelt scene where Chun-Li is talking about how his people invaded her village. They tortured and raped the people there. They stole
yeah,
stuff. Her father fought off his villains, and he ran away and gave the order to have him killed. And that's
yeah,
when she goes on about all this, and he turns around and goes, "I'm sorry, I don't remember any of that." And she's like shocked, like, "You don't remember?" And he comes out with the best line ever, which is, "The day that M. Bison graced your village was the most important moment of your life. For me, it was Thursday." And I'm like,
yeah.
oh, that's the sickest burn in all of history. It's just,
And it's so iconic because whenever anybody thinks of the Street Fighter movie, that's the line or scene that people think of.
yeah. There was actually another Street Fighter movie that was an animated one. I
Yes.
think you've mentioned about that a little bit. What was that like?
So the animated movie, if you actually have the anniversary collection on PS2 or Xbox Original, it does come as a bonus feature, and that's actually how I watched it. I think prior to that, I wasn't even aware that there was an animated movie. I knew they had one for Alpha, but anyways, the movie itself, okay, what we wanted in the live action is what the animated movie gave us. It's not a perfect movie, of course, but it's probably the closest and best thing that you can watch as a Street Fighter fan in terms of actually doing justice and following the Street Fighter story. Simply put, if you're a Street Fighter fan, if you've never seen this movie, go ahead and watch it. You'll enjoy it. I can say that safely.
Yeah, definitely worth having a look and checking that one out then. I suppose it's then we're saying, look, obviously Street Fighter 2, it's had a massive impact. We've seen talked about movies, comics. I know you see M. Bison and Zangief in Wreck-It Ralph. The Street Fighter 2 characters appear in other games, such as Capcom versus Marvel. It's just this massive franchise that you go into a game shop now, you will find some form of Street Fighter 2 merchandise there. And I think those visuals, like I'm looking on your screen now, Ken facing up against Ryu, they're just so iconic. And this is going to be a bit of a tricky question, but I'm going to ask you to wrap this up. What does Street Fighter 2 mean to you?
For me, in terms of meaning, it's probably, well, in my opinion, because I have so many memories with it as well, and beautiful memories. Street Fighter 2 as a series is possibly the best, or I will say, the best fighting game series of all time. And Super Street Fighter 2, in my humble and personal opinion, but I also have a bias because I have so much memories, great memories playing it, is the best fighting game of all time, and I'll even say the best game of all time. For me, it has a special place in my heart forever.
Yeah, that's really high praise, and I think it is warranted. I think for me, similar things. I remember my time as a the first time I was a real console owner is tied to two things. It is tied to Mario and it's tied to Street Fighter. I had the
Yeah,
SNES. I had other consoles, but that SNES was the first true console I owned. And I can't imagine that period of time without playing the Street Fighter 2 games. Um, I think I see that as the golden age of gaming, and especially of retro gaming now. It is that 16-bit era. And I can't think of the 16-bit era of gaming without Mario and Street Fighter. And I think for me to put Street Fighter up there on a level with Mario as a franchise, as a character, I think that speaks exceptionally highly of it. So for those of you who are listening, if that's where you want to end it, thank you very much for watching. But I would encourage you to stay around a little bit, because we're just going to have a quick little talk to wrap things up with Raza about his channel, what the reasons behind that channel are, and everything. So please, if you're interested at all, do stick around, have a little listen to this. But for those of you that want to go there, now we finished talking about Street Fighter 2, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. First of all, Raza is retro. What's the meaning behind the name of that?
So basically, so I have two first names, and my brother does as well, and also my sister. Raza is actually my father's name. So it's basically just saying that the Raza family, if you will,
Okay.
we are a retro family.
Okay. Right, that makes sense actually. And what is it about retro gaming that feels like this is what you want to focus on for your channel?
But retro gaming, it just what it is for me, and I like my content is also like with retro movies and TV shows, but that whole, I guess, retro culture, uh, it just brings me back to a simpler time. As we grow up, as we get older, life itself is a very beautiful thing, and growing up is a beautiful thing as well. But I find the best moments of my life were when I was younger, when I was a little naive, if you will. So, those times where, you come from school and the only thing you're worried about is, finishing a video game or trying to beat a friend at a video game or to watch a movie or an old school wrestling tape or whatever the case is. That's what really appeals to me because it brings me back to a simpler time and a time where I had a lot of beautiful memories and a lot of great moments. Like I said, life is beautiful, and I'm very blessed to have a beautiful family. But when I do think about the old times, I definitely wish I can go back just simply because it was simpler. So that's really what appeals to me about the retro culture. Obviously, the games, the movies, the TV shows, they were all great in their own aspect. And what I liked about retro gaming is that it had its own charm. Games looked simple, but they weren't actually simple at all. They
No.
were very quite difficult. But there was just a charm about playing, an 8-bit game or a 16-bit game or, a 32, 64. There was just a charm that it has that modern gaming, I feel, doesn't have. Modern gaming is great. I love it, especially modern sports games. Like, I find they're better than retro games.
Yeah.
But there's just a charm that retro gaming has that modern doesn't.
I think as well, and obviously I already know this a little bit. For those that don't already know, I've actually been speaking to Raza for quite a while now, both on YouTube, Instagram. So we've been talking for quite a while now, and I think I personally, hopefully it's okay to say this, feel quite comfortable to say I think we've actually become quite good friends. I think, and so I already know quite a bit about this, but I think what might be really helpful for people to know, to understand just how important your channel is to you, and I think how meaningful your channel is. There's actually some deeper meaning behind why you've made your channel, isn't there? I just wondered if you'd feel able to talk a little bit about what that was.
Yeah, no, most definitely. So basically, my channel is a tribute to a memory of my late brother. I had a brother by the name of Sean who passed away. He passed away. He passed away in his sleep. One morning, uh, he was supposed to wake up. He did real estate, and he had an appointment, and he didn't wake up. And when we called the ambulance, they came, they did what they had to, and they said, "We're sorry to tell you, but he passed away. It's been about 2 hours." So losing him and losing him in that manner, because it was obviously a surprise and shock. It's one thing if he was sick, he had cancer or something like that. You can kind of prepare yourself more or less. But the fact that he just, left just like that, it was a very, very tough situation for the whole family, especially for my parents, because no parent should ever go through that.
No.
So basically, for a long time, obviously, I wasn't in a good place, I guess, if you will. Um, I did feel that by losing my brother, I became closer to God, but at the same time, it was not something that I can accept. It took a while for me to accept. But when I finally accepted it, I realized, because I have two kids, and my brother, unfortunately, he didn't have any children, but he was very close with my girls. I felt that I should do something that they can remember him by, because when he passed away, they were very young. And I realized that the day and age we live in, everything is, digital, everything is, done on Instagram, YouTube, you know,
Yeah.
everything is done online. And if we're going to be honest, the way the world is going, I don't think kids will have the intention span to be like, hey, you know what, sit down for 20 or 30 minutes and let's talk about your uncle.
Yeah.
So I basically just share some of the, games that he grew up with, some of the movies that he liked, some of the TV shows that he liked, just to, just for them to see that, hey, our uncle, he liked doing this, or he liked watching that. A lot of these things are still in my house, and I hope that as time progresses, they can keep them, because I will definitely keep them until the day I die, and I'm hoping that they can continue doing that. Simply just due to the fact that when I do, when we live our life, when we go through life, it's normal, right? You move on, you can forget sometimes. So sometimes when I do look at these things, it brings back a memory of my brother, and sometimes I say a little prayer, just to hope that God is happy with him, and I want my kids to do the same thing, essentially, after when I'm gone. At the same time, as much as it's for my brother, it's also for me as well, in the sense that I'm also sharing my memories. I'm sharing things that I liked. So again, it's another way for my kids to look back and remember me when my time comes. The amount of people that I've met through YouTube and Instagram has been phenomenal, and they're quality people. And for whatever reason, 90% of them are in England. So
We're
God bless
fantastic
England.
people over here. That's the reason
Yeah,
why we are.
yeah, I'm beginning to think I'm not getting a lot of love from Canada, though. But no, honestly, I've always, I mean, I love people regardless, but like, I've always had a bit of a special connection with England, just because I'm a big sports fan. And a lot of the sports that I like do come from England, right?
Well, I
Soccer,
will. I
cricket.
will say this right now: if you and your
Yeah,
family ever decide to move over to England or visit England,
yeah.
you will. I will more than happily show you the ropes and show you rounds. It would be a pleasure. It would be a pleasure.
No, most definitely. I feel like if I ever do move there, like, I would fit in quite well. But
I think so.
um, I've learned so much from different people about different games that I've never heard of, different movies I've never heard of, facts about movies, facts about TV shows, and the fact that I mentioned that, I have a lot of people that I follow from England and other parts of the world, even, like Ireland, Scotland. So I have some people I'm even following in Japan, in Brazil. So I'm learning about different cultures and different ways of life, and I think that's a beautiful thing. At the same time, it's also just to have fun. I'm really enjoying this. I don't take myself too seriously, in the sense that I just try to have fun with it. I post when I feel like it. I post when I want to share something special or something silly. I like to laugh, and that's a good memory of my brother. He was always somebody that enjoyed to laugh. So that's why sometimes you'll see me post these, funny and bizarre shorts, and you might be thinking, hey, what's wrong with this guy? Oh, there's nothing wrong with this guy. He's just trying to be funny. Keyword try. So, it's for him. It's a memory for him. It's for me, and it's for the people that I've met through this great platform. And anybody that comes through my channel, a big, big thank you. I hope, whoever tunes in and watches, you enjoy my channel, because believe me, everyone that I've subscribed to and that I followed, I really, really enjoy. In particularly Saber Duel. He's one of the first that I've met, and it's been a pleasure since day one.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. And I would say as well, a big thank you to you, because not only for coming on this today, but you are one of those people that you always interact with people's live streams. You always come up with new creative ideas. I mean, for anyone who hasn't already seen on YouTube, Raz has organized a load of different gaming challenges and stuff, and keeping like a little league table. It's all really good fun stuff. I'm not just sort of pimping out his page because we're friends and stuff like that. I would genuinely say, if you like retro gaming, it is worth subscribing. Have a little look at what he does, especially if you have your own channel. If you have your own channel and are looking for other people to interact and engage with, check it out, because he does some really good, engaging stuff. And yeah, it is really good. Just before we wrap up, I'm going to ask one more question, because obviously, a lot of this channel that's really important, that is you mentioned there about your brother Sean and how much of a motivating factor he was for it. So I want to give him a little bit of presence in this podcast. I want you to see if you can tell me what game, if you can name one or two games that he particularly enjoyed playing, or that you particularly enjoyed playing together, just to give him his little moment in this. What would you say are a game or two that he really loved, or that you really loved playing together?
Well, the reason why I also came onto this podcast is, like, when you mentioned that we were going to talk about Street Fighter and Super Street Fighter in particular, that was because of his memory. Because Super Street Fighter was a game that he loved a lot, that he played a lot, and that he enjoyed. Another one that I can throw out there, and it's a game that we played quite often together, was Super Double Dragon. What I really loved about that game is you can just, pop in the second controller and hit start, and we'd always kind of have fun with that. One other game that I will mention, it's not that retro, but it was very special, was Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks. It's a game me and him spent a couple of days playing together. And what was really cool about that particular game was my sister would actually watch us. So she wasn't really a gamer. She would just watch if she found it interesting. So it was a game that, I guess connected all three of us, because we had me and him playing, and we had her watching. And sometimes, like, my dad would be like, "Hey, did you finish your homework?" And he's like, "Yeah, he did." And he would just tell me, like, "Okay, come, like, let's go hop on." Because he really enjoyed it, and it was great fun. And the last thing I'll just mention about a game, because I think that's important, is the last game that he played. So for a while he wasn't gaming, and then we had on our Xbox One Saint Rose 3, I believe it was.
Yeah.
It was like a special edition. Um, I was initially playing it, and then he said, "Do you mind if I give it a try?" I said, "No, go for it." And then he just played it, finished it, and completed all the missions. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that that's a game that's always going to be special to me, just due to the fact that it was the last game he played before he passed away.
Well, thanks a lot for sharing that, Raz. I think it just goes to show, not just about your channel, but just how games and video games, like anything else in life, they can really connect us to people. And I know there's certain games I've played that connect me to my nephew, to my mum, to all kinds of different people in my life. And who knows, maybe that could be a topic for a future podcast anyway. I'm just going to wrap up there. So, again, I've already said it, but I want to say a big thank you to Raza for joining me for this podcast. It's been really appreciated. It's been really fun to do. And of course, I want to say a big thank you to everyone that's watched and listened to the podcast. I know these things are long, so if you've stuck with us throughout the whole thing, damn, I appreciate it. And even if you're not listening to me right now, but you made it even halfway through, still appreciate it.
And I will just finish off by saying what I always kind of say in my videos, is that life is like a game. You decide how to play it and when you play it. All you got to do is just hit the start button, and always remember to remain retro.
All right, well, I can't end it much better than that. So, Raza, thank you very much for being here. Everyone who's listened, thank you for being here. And until next time, take the high ground.